Welcome to the Mason Duchatschek Show. And before we jump in, this episode is brought to you by workforcealchemy.com, helping leaders discover and uncover hidden profit leaks inside their business operations. Today's guest is Gal Borenstein. He's a strategic branding expert who has spent nearly 30 years advising CEOs on how to protect their reputation and scale in high-risk environments. He's the author of Don't Believe the Hype. It's a practical executive guide to navigating credibility, perception, and leadership in the age of digital and AI. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So in your book, you open with how the digital world has blurred what's real and what's not. Can you share a real example where that confusion created a big business problem?
Of course, I would use a big company example, but let's talk about the fact that before we had distributed workforces, any company would have a lot more human frame type interaction. So if your manager was working in a place, if there was a problem, you solved it by having kind of a meeting, and you had a relationship that was really based on the idea of trust that goes beyond being transactional in a sense. So it's not just a meeting to get something out of somebody and being nice for 30 seconds. It was basically the relationship is what created the fabric of a corporation. Lo and behold, I believe it was 2 to 3 years ago, we all know the brand name of Boeing being a great company that had a very good reputation of being a safety first company. And then, interestingly enough, the trust that existed inside the company fell apart because the management of the company and the leadership did not really take into consideration how we're listening to our employees, all the way down to the floor, basically where people are putting together parts. And I use this example on a corporate level because it is very telling about what trust should be and what happens when you don't do it, because it was a very costly mistake. And all it was an employee that was working in quality assurance and coming to check on a widget that was falling apart. And the information between the worker and the supervisor did not make it all the way to the executive management or the higher ups in the company in a timely manner. And they maybe thought that, it's not important enough. Maybe they can get away with it. Maybe it's a quality assurance program that checks all the boxes, so they're not worried about it. But what happened? There was a crash, then followed by investigations about what happened. And the conclusion of that event was we can't trust Boeing without really checking on the details, because now the promise of the brand, which is kind of being kind of the safest company in the world and being the leader, which is actually true after Airbus, that you really can trust this plane to really go up and come down safely. So it took possibly a year for all of the public relations, the crisis communications, and making changes in management to create the optics and the new kind of brand where we can say for them that they're trustworthy and they're being transparent and they collaborate with the media. And if somebody complains, they take the complaint and kind of expedite the process of conversation. So I use that example because that is kind of help crystallize what trust today is versus what it was before. Before, trust was something that you could break, but you owned the narrative about the company and you cover it with advertising maybe and a lot of slick PR. But now in a digital age and the age of AI, you no longer own the narrative of your company, because if before COVID, we only had newspapers maybe and magazines, and that was very influential. Now we have micro influencers, which could be somebody that has 10,000 followers on a completely innocuous account that doesn't have anything to do with safety or with Boeing, but it goes to 10,000 people that then produce 20,000 comments. And from there on, what happens is your brand basically is being kind of prostituted to social media that is unregulated, and it shouldn't be regulated. But the point being that your digital footprint is more important than ever, because whatever your narrative is, when you take it to the marketplace, if you don't listen to the outside and you don't incorporate your company values with the promise that you make, it becomes the promise that you don't keep. That's really kind of where a lot of the issues are. And in small to mid-sized companies, even more so, because they don't have the sophistication of Boeing.
Right. You talk about fake reviews and manipulated perception. Have you seen a company get caught in that ecosystem, and how did it impact their growth?
Well, I won't name any names, of course, since I've been doing this for 30 years, but I can tell you that for companies, for example, that use Glassdoor, which the idea was to create a transparent environment where people can talk about their workplace, it hurts recruitment dramatically, because the new generation that was born with an iPhone, they don't even go to the computer, right? The desktop. They go on their iPhone, they pull up the app and they say, let's look at the grades that this company is getting. Let's say a technology company is trying to recruit IT people, new talent, and you look at the reviews, and the reviews are very poor for that company. And it looks like there was one disgruntled employee, which is normal because there's a clown in every circus, and you don't take that as much seriously unless it's something that turned into something ugly in the press or legal. But when you get 20 or 30 reviews for a technology company that is trying to recruit an IT specialist, for each IT specialist, it costs about $10,000 to $20,000 in recruiting costs to actually get them to sign up. And that's without the bonuses, because it's a very in pursuit type of economy. What happens when an entire generation, which is the millennials and Gen Z, which are kind of going to be the foreseeable future middle management to upper management, what happens when they basically judge the company by the reviews? And then when you see the reviews, some of them are real and most of them are fake, meaning somebody that doesn't wish you well puts out a review that looks original, but it isn't. It's created by a competitor. And that happened many times, where way before AI agents came to play, where I literally had to advise my client is look at the information in the review and tell me if this is somebody who actually would work for you or have the persona of somebody who actually worked here before, versus saying former employee, anonymous, and then give the company 1 star, and then the CEO rating goes dramatically down. So in this new age, we don't control what Glassdoor publishes. In fact, they insist that everything has to be anonymous. And when you have anonymous social media, it really hurts the bottom line of a company, and it becomes a reputation issue that can be monetized into the loss of, for example, recruitment. The same could be an IPO that goes out. And then a day after the IPO goes out, you have a bulletin board on Yahoo Finance or anywhere else where people put rumors about the fact that the product doesn't even work. Or I was the coder that was involved, and guess what? It doesn't do how the things that it needs to do. So it's very.
So what kind of advice did you or would you give to an employer who is a victim of that?
2 things. The first is you always need to get ahead of the news. If you don't catch what happened in real time or close to near time, somebody published something today, you're not tracking it via social media listening, which every suite, like Hootsuite and other companies that do that.
Even Google Alerts. Setting up Google Alerts for your
as
company
simple
name.
as Google Alerts about your company, and you don't catch it in time, it makes it a lot more difficult. But it is one way to make sure that you have a response team that actually can verify if this is real, if this is fake, if this is coming from a competitor who's trying to really ruin your business in a surreptitious way. And the second is deal with the consequences, which is go on the offense, don't stay on defense. Most companies are advised by their very smart legal departments to say nothing, because that might cause down the road discourse that might be a liability to the company. I'm in branding and PR, and I can tell you that the first 24 hours of a news cycle, if you don't get ahead of the story, if you don't respond to employee reviews and say, for example, I apologize, or we apologize for not implementing the HR program of having fun every Friday, for example, but we corrected it, or we're in the process of correcting it, please contact us. Anything that sounds genuine and creates a conversation kills the sting of a review that is killing your company's reputation. And you can do that by forming a tactical response team within your company, depending on your size, of course. If you can afford having 2 or 3 people in your marketing department, do that. Or you can use additional support from agencies that specialize in PR and strategic communications. But overall, what a CEO needs to have is a dashboard in front of them. And that dashboard includes what is the brand perception of the company. And it's no longer only the good stuff that the PR agency, including mine, would give you, where we got you into the Wall Street Journal, we got you into the Washington Post, whatever it is. Let's celebrate it at the end. That's not reality anymore, because in the digital world, every bad thing that happens goes to places that you don't control. So you need to always be on the initiative and be prepared with answers that you can use to alleviate or kind of take this thing away from those companies.
I like to think of it as a digital tattoo. You're
It's a
stuck with it.
digital footprint. That's what we call it. Yes, it's a tattoo.
So you introduce the Guardian framework. Can you give us a description of what that is? And can you maybe give us a concrete example of a company that's applying one piece of that model effectively?
Of course. First, kind of in my book, Don't Believe the Hype When Trust is on the Line in the Age of AI, it really kind of starts by saying the world has changed, but then the Guardian, which is a trust building framework that I kind of developed, is based on the principles of collaboration, transparency, and really being able to produce real and smart ways of actually communicating within the company first. Because what happens very often is a company makes a promise, that's advertising. But when you look at the staff or the floor workers, and then you go up to the middle management, and then you go to the next part of it, which is the executive management, and you ask them, what are your company values? What is the value proposition? What is the differentiation? And you get 3 different answers that don't really jive together. That's the first place to start. It means your internal culture has to be very specific to build something that everyone is on the same page. So what I argue in my book is that you don't start by taking care of the outside first. You have to take care of the inside and make sure that everybody's on board and is aligned with the messaging that you want to get out, and make sure that the promise that you make is something that won't get broken as soon as it goes out. So a small business example, an HVAC company that advertises cooling season for AC, right? And they really have a great commercial. And then the 2 technicians that show up talk poorly about the company in front of the customer, in the house. How does that happen? It happens because there was no alignment and proper training to make sure that everyone in the company knows these are the rules. It's not a policy. It's actually has to come from within. And then the outside world really goes to the idea of how do you measure what customers and prospects are thinking about you when they think about the word trust. Do they trust you in attribute 1, 2, and 3? For example, Facebook had to deal with a big crisis of communication in the past 2 years, which has to do with being transparent about their AI, and most importantly, about the fact that most of the money they make is by selling the names and likeness and the kind of content that profiles a consumer that then they can sell for $1, for $2, for $3 to a marketer. They will use it to kind of create a very kind of specific profile that they can advertise to. But what happened is you start seeing, and I don't know if you notice it, but I do, a bunch of people start putting kind of like a paragraph that says, I do not give my permission to Facebook to put my likeness or my face or my information in my chats on any ad, on any type of public communications, period. And then people that don't quite understand how the system works are cutting and pasting it. And you see it almost on a daily basis, depending on the age group that you're dealing with. That has to do with being transparent about what you're doing. So Facebook had to spend a lot of time on rethinking, what do we owe the customers based on what the customers are saying. If they belong to an exclusive group of people and you have, let's say, 50 or 100 friends that like to talk about movies, you don't really want that information sold because it's called a private group. But if there's no difference between a private group and a public group of people just that like movies, that really kind of is a big miss. So Facebook had that situation where governance of the information was not really kind of as tight as it needed to be. And the result was studies show that Gen X, especially, that kind of hugged Facebook as a kind of a community, really kind of went through that process of having to earn back the trust of the people, create safety tools to avoid having fake propaganda and fake news type of videos. It's still around, but it's a lot tighter now, and they are listening to the customers, which ultimately is what most companies forget to do. And what I recommend in my system, The Guardian, the way you build trust is you ask customers the difficult questions. The one that didn't give you 5 stars, the one that gave you constructive criticism, are the ones that you need to interview way before you go down the road to go to market with a new product or service, as long as you haven't already. You'll be amazed how many companies never actually do a voice of the customer interview. I'm not talking about did we do well on this installation? Did we do well on this project? An actual conversation between a company person and a customer. And when you miss that, you miss the personality of the company, but most importantly, you miss the opportunity to improve and to make your company more trustworthy, your product and service more solid. And then you're showing by asking those questions that you are actually a trusted company that I can work with or buy their products. To give you as recent as in the past 3 or 4 weeks, Burger King started a new kind of commercial campaign. And the premise of it is showing kind of people that work for Burger King, and I believe some of them were kind of executives, say, let's face it, our food has not been as good as it used to be. We hear you, and we understand that nobody likes the chicken sandwich or the burger. It doesn't really does what it needs to do to make you happy. And by the way, we're getting rid of the creepy Burger King character. And that really is something that you don't see a lot. Domino's did the same thing. Why would you put out the dirty laundry and say to your customers, we suck? And
Your
we hope
customers
you
are already
get
saying it anyway.
exactly. But in my experience over 30 years working with companies, it is so rare where transparency and turning it into an opportunity to really do better happens. And then having the kind of collaborative approach of knowing that your customers are, the lifeline of the business.
I'm going to
And if
piggyback
you
on
execute
something you're
well,
saying there. I'm going to piggyback on something you're saying, because for those who are listening, there are people listening thinking right now, well, they're either the business owner or they're in the executive suite, and they're saying, well, no one's complaining and we've got people out there listening, so we must be doing a great job. And they're not. I will give you a very
absolutely.
specific example. When I moved recently, I had to get new health insurance, new doctors, because I moved out of state. And the hospital system that I got into said, oh, we've got this new app, and they didn't have their act together. And it's like, oh, it's real simple. It only take a couple. No, it wasn't simple. And the people at the front desk couldn't help. And they said, well, you need to call these people in tech support. They'll make it easy. So I call and I talked to 7 different people, not one of which had the right answer. They were all different answers. It was a terrible experience. I spent over an hour just to do basic things like become a patient. This was complete, and I'm not ranting because I wouldn't give their name either. Completely unacceptable. Like, and I'm tech savvy enough, but I think of someone my parents' age, they would have not had healthcare because they couldn't do it. No one, I mean, they would give up. And I got a email sent to me from their quality control department or head of quality control or whatever. I couldn't believe it. And they said, hey, if you'd like to discuss this, give us a call at this number. I did. And I waited on hold for over 17 minutes. And at 16 minutes, as far as I knew, I could be on there for an hour. I don't know. How many people after 15 minutes or 5 minutes or 3 minutes would have said, I'm going to be on hold forever and I'm not getting paid for this. I'm doing them a favor by calling. And they would have just checked out, which means someone who had a bad experience that cared enough to help them, called them, waited and waited and waited and got so frustrated they hung up. And the executive thinking, see, we're not getting any complaints. Then at 17 minutes, a lady did pick up the phone and she said, yes, I'm in charge of this. I said, okay, before we begin, do you have the ability to affect change and fix things? Or do you just put together a little report and go to report to the executive? She's like, the latter. I'm like, ooh. I'm like, this is what happened. What must I say here to help you get their attention? Because they aren't listening. They aren't paying attention. They think this is fine. And you probably think you're doing okay too, because not everyone's willing to wait on the phone as long as I was to call you or to wait on the phone as long as I was. And you guys think you're doing a great job when you're not.
It's amazing. I can give you a very kind of pedestrian example that goes right into what you just said. As late as today, prior to the podcast, I had to fill out 8 forms of privacy before going to a doctor's appointment. It was all online, which was a great improvement over time, where you put all the information, insurance, your data in ahead of the appointment, which is a good thing, right? But most of my visits before to the same healthcare provider, the 8 pages and the age forms that really kind of came to me, as soon as I filled them out online, I got a confirmation that I got them online. But then when you show up in the doctor's office, they hand you a clipboard with the same 8 pages. And you now have to be stressed and, most importantly, fill out the same information that you provided already online with the purpose of expediency, the idea of saving frustration, of creating a better relationship. So someone in that organization does not connect the dot. But I can tell you, in working with companies, that is very common, where nobody's reading the customer reviews. Nobody's actually reaching out to customers that have not experienced the best experience. And yes, like you said, the most dangerous thing you can do in the digital age, especially where people can complain without complaining to you directly, is to really listen. And the dangerous part is if you don't listen and you basically believe on your dashboard or your virtual dashboard of management that if no complaints mean we're doing great, oh my God, you're probably at a 5 when it comes to being trusted, because constructive criticism actually means people care. And that's a good thing. And
I'll
that's
even
why
go one,
companies.
one deeper. I was in Las Vegas about 10 months ago, and I stayed at a very nice resort with lots of stars. I had an expectation of it certainly being upper level, not average. So my expectations were above it. And it was a below average experience. And I'm not I don't bash folks, but I try to make things better and offer. And I asked for the manager, and she was very nice. And she's like, I am the highest ranking person here. There's one above me, but what can I do to help? And I just explained the situation. And she just looked so defeated because she was obviously cared and was working hard. And she's like, I hate to tell you this. She goes, but you need, because I said, I don't want to put a bad review on your company because I know there are good people here working hard and you have systems in place that are decisions which can be shifted and made to other decisions. And I promise you that the decisions you have in place right now are causing you lots of bad reviews and bad word of mouth and things that you can't get off the internet. And I said, and that's a very expensive way for your management team to learn the lessons. The other way they could do it is your senior executives could actually go through the experience as a customer, and then you wouldn't have to have this explained to you. She's like, I know. She goes, that all happens out of town above us. The only way you can get their attention is to give a review. So she's literally an employee saying, go ahead, ream us online, because if you don't, they won't pay attention. And I was just like,
yes, and that is exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to internal culture. If the culture is not aligned with being providing trusted information internally between the different levels of management, you would have somebody that actually care tell you, yeah, go and put a bad Google review because I'm trying to help you. And I'm sure you felt that this person really cares.
they did.
We don't know if the manager and the supervisor and the leadership of the company ever got that note. And in order to survive and thrive in an environment where you do not own the narrative, the marketplace owns your narrative, you have to prepare to listen, to solicit feedback about what's not working, not just what is working, and then incorporate it and make sure that everyone on every layer in the company understand what their role is to alleviate the problem. Most of the time, you get the excuse, it's the technology, we don't have enough personnel to answer the phone, we're overwhelmed. This is all bullshit. And the reason it's bullshit is what's more important than listening to your customers to create trust? What's more important than selling more and get more profits by doing the right thing and improving your product, improving your service? That's really where companies are lying to themselves and companies are lying to their customers. And eventually that lie catches up and it becomes either people get fired for giving real feedback or people basically get promoted to a lateral position where they'll never have to actually talk about the issue.
You know what story is coming? It's hitting me between the eyes. And we heard about when we were children, and it still applies today in a business sense. It's the emperor has no clothes. No one wants to be the one to bring the boss the bad news. So everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. The emperor has no clothes. And nowadays it's the customers that are telling the emperor, the internet, that the emperor has no clothes because the employees don't.
Absolutely. And a positive example of that could be also go on Amazon and you're looking for a book and there is a community of readers that are able to provide reviews. And when you see, for example, a product that has only 1 star or 2 stars, or you see 2,000 people that put 3 stars or below versus 5 star, which is the ideal, it basically immediately makes you think this product sucks or doesn't work, or I don't know what's wrong with it, but obviously I don't want to buy something that might not work because there's like 2,000 people saying it. It must be true, right? That's really kind of a consumer point of view that you think that it's safer to buy something that has more reviews, which isn't necessarily the case every time. It could be that a new merchant is selling the same thing. It could be a new innovation that nobody else is selling. It could be many, many things. But listening to that feedback, if you're selling a product or service on Amazon, for example, it could be anything. That's really your opportunity to kind of create a dialogue and figure out why is it that the review was so harsh. And Etsy is a very good example of a place that take that very seriously and actually follows up with people. So Etsy is kind of a unique business model where you buy things that are kind of funky, if you will, or custom ordered, which is a great thing. But at the end of the day, they want your feedback because they want to make it better and help the small business that is selling something sell more. And you can't do that if trust does not exist.
So you said that credibility is built across every touch point. Can you share an example where one weak link caused a disproportionate amount of damage?
Absolutely. I can really kind of go back to a client that should not be named, no longer a client in the information technology field, which is a lot of of our client base and, the type of people that we attract being in the Washington, D.C. area, that really had a complete breakdown in communications in their executive management team and the leadership. And it went like this. We started the work of the idea of kind of rebranding that company. That was the ask from the leadership, from the CEO of the company when I got this call. So the first thing we did individual interviews with key managers and asked them, here's like 10 attributes about the company. And one of them, oddly enough, is the company doing well financially? The reason it was an attribute that we wanted to know was that it was a smaller company, and we wanted to see how much communication is going on between the leadership or the owner of the company and the actual management team. And guess what happened when we kind of finished the survey, made sure it was non-attributional, it was confidential, we only shared data in aggregate, and the difference between what the managers said and the CEO was jaw-dropping. The CEO told us in an interview that the company is growing and financially strong and it's preparing to acquire other companies. And then the managers are working for the CEO, answering that attribute question about financial stability of the company, said, we don't know anything. So I'll give it a 2, a 3, a 1. Imagine where the CEO does not know what the people that are sitting next to him or her in a room rated as a 1 or 2 and 3 out of 10. And the CEO thinks that it's a 10. That is something that happened more than once along the 30 years of doing this, but the methodology flashes out very quickly the difference between perception and reality. And how do we end up? We got fired. Our agency got fired after that meeting where we presented the results. The owner of the company, the CEO, a very smart person, for all purposes, did the most basically negative thing that you can do to build trust within your organization.
So you basically told the emperor had no clothes on, and the emperor demonstrated why everyone else should keep telling the emperor that he looks great.
Yes, which
I got
means there was no transparency between the management team and the CEO. And most importantly, they were like on 2 different planets. So they could have basically communicated to the staff in a different way. If you keep all the information to yourself, yes, privately owned company can do that. Publicly owned company have to disclose certain information. But the breakdown of communications happens in leadership and management, and then all the way to the customer reviews of the same company that I'm talking about, which were not really a bunch of happy customers.
Not surprised. So you were talking about CEOs. What's a decision that you've seen a CEO make that protected the long-term brand equity, even though it hurt them in the short term? It's kind of the opposite of that.
It was the ability to be transparent and being able to tell the good news and share the bad news with the employees through town halls, through getting ahead of the story again. If something bad happened, you don't wait for the rumor mill going for 3 weeks. You get on top of it and you put your narrative out and explain why things didn't work this quarter, supply chain issues, whatever it may be. Conversely, when the company's doing well, yes, if someone hears it on the level of a staffer, they might think, well, now they can give me, $5,000 raise. And that may not be the outcome of saying my company is doing better or even, excellent. It's about the fact that the CEO took his time or her time to actually sit down with the employees and say, here's kind of where we are. Here's kind of the vision of where we need to be by the end of the year. Not talking in quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, and four. Talking to them as human beings. And the good news and the bad news, when they're getting communicated that way, that's really the win that monetizes the building of trust into actual dollars and cents. And that's really kind of the whole dissertation, if you will, or the thesis of what I'm trying to spread the word on is trust is no longer just a value. Trust is what drives success and failure, because it's not only the inside of the company, it's the outside of the company. In the digital AI age, things happen that you don't control.
This reminds me of a quote from the famous lawyer Jerry Spence, who wrote the book, I think it was How to Argue and Win Every Time. And he had 10 different tips in there. And one of them I've never forgotten, and I think it's very relevant to this conversation and to the people who are listening. He said, anytime there's a weakness in your argument, you want to be the one to bring it up. Because if you try to hide it or pretend it doesn't exist, then people will present you and your situation in the absolute worst light possible. Where if you take the initiative and you state your viewpoint or your narrative from the beginning, then you can have the opportunity to put yourself in the best light. And make no mistake, if you decide to try to hide or cover it up and wait until it's discovered, that your people, that your opposition is likely to have lots of vigor in saying, aha, look what we found, and drawing even more attention to the totally negative perception they can create. So I've got one last question for you. If there's one piece of advice that you could give to anybody listening today, what would it be and why?
The most important part in building trust is really kind of creating your set of values, put them in a meter and benchmark where you are on these values that relate to your marketing, your sales organization, your quality assurance, your operations. And it's okay to get 3 out of 10 when you benchmark it at the beginning. But now you can develop an action plan to fix it and then come back and measure it again, whether it's internal or external. And if you start with that framework of just benchmarking where you are and then come up with an action plan on how to fix it, but have 10 attributes, because if you don't, you're missing something like financial, HR, whatever it may be. And then once you have it, you have 2 things happening. You got a system that can give you the real situation, or the dashboard, if you will. And most importantly, you get the buy-in of your management team, because now the management team owns the parts of any attribute that is on the system, or own one of it. The point being, if you're not listening and creating kind of a situational awareness of where we are today, and then you basically just move on or say, well, no complaints, we're doing great, that will be the death of you or the death of your business.
So, first of all, thank you. If people want to know more about you, your book, your company, what you do, what are the best ways for them to connect with you?
The personal connection would be check out LinkedIn and request a connection. Gal Borenstein is a name that you forget when you type on LinkedIn. And for the people that are actually listening and watching this podcast, I offer a free complimentary consultation. All you have to do is mention the name of the podcast in your message, and we will provide that free consultation, because we believe in giving back to the community.
Thank you for that. And what's your website?
The website is borensongroup.com, spelled BORENSTEINGROUP.com. Most importantly, if you want to learn about the building of a trust framework for your business, or give it to your CEO and get some feedback, you can find them on Amazon. My 2 latest books that are really connected to each other is, the first one is Don't Believe the Hype, which is acknowledging that there's a problem and erosion of trust and you got to fix it. And the second one, which got published very recently, is called Beating Goliath with AI. And that has to do with the fact that most of us are Davids. When we deal with the bigger competitor, we got to have digital slingshots. And the book basically appeals to the small to mid-sized business owners and CEOs. So it's practical advice on how to fix it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience. I hope everyone else learned as much and enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.